Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, let's dive into this. Today we're looking at a concept that honestly seems deceptively simple on the surface, but it actually forms the bedrock of how we understand the entire world around us: cause and effect. Whether you're trying to figure out why your cookies burned in the oven or, I don't know, analyzing the root causes of a massive historical revolution, you're using this exact same skill. So today we aren't just going to learn how to spot it, we're going to learn how to master it, explain it, and absolutely prove it like a true detective.
So, here's our roadmap for today. 1. The basics of cause. 2. Spotting the signal words. 3. The detective toolkit. 4. The two-part question trap. And 5. Beyond just reading.
All right, Section 1, the basics of cause, the foundation of reading.
Let's just establish the absolute fundamental definitions first. The cause is the reason for a situation or a change, right? It's why something happens. The effect, on the flip side, is the result or the consequence. It's what actually happened. Now listen, here is the golden rule you've just got to lock into your memory right now. The cause always happens first in time. Even if the author decides to write it way later in the sentence, the timeline simply doesn't lie.
And this brilliantly illustrates how this dynamic governs our everyday real-life situations. Think about it. If you're speeding down the highway, well, that action happens first. That's your cause. Getting pulled over, seeing those flashing lights, and getting the ticket from the police officer, that's the effect. Receiving a ticket couldn't possibly cause you to speed in the past, right? The cause creates the effect.
Okay, let's play detective for a quick second and examine the case of Tara's awful day. Look at this incredibly simple one-to-one relationship. Tara forgot to set her alarm clock. That's the initial event, our cause. So what was the inevitable outcome here? She didn't wake up on time. This right here is the absolute bedrock of how narratives work. One action directly forces another. But you might be wondering, how do authors actually communicate these connections to us?
Let's find out in Section 2, spotting the signal words, hunting for clues.
So here is your ultimate cheat sheet for spotting a cause. We're looking for words like because, since, due to, if, when, caused by. Now, I want you to notice the very first word on that list, because. That is the ultimate clue. Why? Well, because it literally has the word cause right inside it. If a sentence says, Tara didn't wake up on time because she forgot to set her alarm, guys, the author is literally handing you the cause on a silver platter.
But what about the other side of the coin? Here are your effect words: so, therefore, as a result, consequently, thus, then. When you're reading along and you hit a word like thus or so, warning bells should immediately go off in your head. These words instantly signal to you, the reader, that an outcome, a result, or a consequence has literally just occurred. They act like this giant neon arrow pointing right at the effect.
Now, this is where things get a little tricky. We've mastered the basic one-to-one relationships, and we know our signal words. But what happens when the author hides the clues? What happens when you're facing a tough Level 4 text on an exam, and the test makers have intentionally removed all those helpful guide words like because and therefore? How in the world do we find the cause then?
That brings us to Section 3, the Detective Toolkit, 4 core strategies.
Strategy number 1 is what I call the what change test. When there are absolutely no signal words, you've got to track the before and the after. Before, the village had water. After, the river dried up. As a reader, when you see these two contrasting states, you must actively pause and ask yourself the ultimate detective's prompt: what caused the change? You're suddenly forced to infer that an underlying event, like, say, a severe drought, connected that before to the after. Let's move to and see how this builds into strategy number 2, the arrow method. You see, as texts get harder, you stop seeing single isolated events, and you start seeing chains of events. By annotating the text with mental or even physical arrows, you can actually track the domino effect. The storm flooded the town, which points to the people evacuating, which points to the schools closing. One effect instantly becomes the cause for the very next event in the sequence. It's like a chain reaction.
Strategy number 3 is your built-in logic checker, the flip-it test. Look, it is super common for students to mix up the cause and the effect. It happens all the time. To fix this, simply reverse your statement. Let's say you think the effect is crops failed, and the cause is no rain. Just read it backward to see if it makes sense. Did the crops failing cause it to not rain? No way, absolutely not. That makes 0 sense. So your logic is sound. The lack of rain simply must be the cause.
Tracing a timeline really reveals how this all works in practice. Month 1 brings a drought. That directly causes month 2's crop failure. Now, the crop failure is an effect, right? But it immediately becomes the cause of month 3's food shortage, which in turn causes month 4's mass migration. This is exactly how sophisticated reading works, tracking how one single event ripples through an entire narrative. Moving on to Section 4, the two-part question trap, the test monster.
Now, what's really interesting about the anatomy of this test monster is how it actively forces you to prove your work. These two-part questions, they're designed to test if you've really grasped the full stack of cause and effect. Part A almost always asks for your inference or reasoning, basically what happened or why. Part B then demands the specific text evidence, which sentence actually proves it. You have to have both halves perfectly aligned.
Let's look at an example so we can see this crucial test-taking strategy in action. Part A asks, why did he leave the village? You infer the answer is, there was no food. Okay, great. Now, you must hunt in Part B for the precise evidence to back it up, which in this case is the sentence, the fields had been dry for months. The strategy here is incredibly strict. Always answer Part A first, lock it in completely, and then go hunting for the exact text evidence that supports that specific answer in Part B.
And this brings us to the golden rule of two-part questions. And honestly, you should treat this as absolute gospel. If your evidence in Part B doesn't explicitly match your answer in Part A, one of them is wrong, period. Test makers absolutely love to put interesting or historically accurate distractor answers in Part B. Please do not fall for them. If the evidence doesn't act as hard, undeniable proof for your specific cause and effect relationship, you really need to stop and reevaluate your choice.
Take this sentence frame, for example. The crops failed because there was a long drought which prevented plants from getting enough water. This is just a perfect example of a strong, explicit answer. It clearly states the effect, it uses that ultimate signal word because, it states the cause, and then, this is key, it provides a reasoned explanation, not just a lazy restatement.
Finally, Section 5, beyond just reading, cross-curricular.
Because look, mastering cause and effect goes way beyond just passing a reading comprehension test. This single concept literally explodes into every other academic subject you'll ever study. In a science experiment, you're manipulating a variable, that's the cause, to observe the result, the effect. In history, you're studying the massive events that triggered wars and economic shifts. In literature, it's all about character motivation. Even in math, it's decoding the hidden logic of word problems. It's everywhere.
So the crucial point is this. When you learn cause and effect, you aren't just learning some neat reading trick. You are developing a true meta skill. You're learning logical reasoning, systems thinking, and evidence-based thinking. You are literally training your brain to think like a scientist and a historian at the exact same time. You are learning how to understand the actual machinery of how our world works.
So the next time you sit down with a complex text, a historical document, or honestly, even just a news article on your phone, I really want you to ask yourself these 3 provocative questions. What happened? Why did it happen? And where is the proof? Because if you can answer those 3 things, there is no text you cannot master. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking questions, and I'll see you next time.